You teach history to ninth graders. The students think you live an ordinary life. Your colleagues think you're still paying off your mortgage. None of them know that, on paper, you quietly own 20 companies. The principal has known you for 12 years. Every Friday, he asks if you're staying for the staff lunch. He's never once asked about your businesses because he has no idea they exist. That isn't luck. It wasn't always this way. 15 years earlier, you didn't have investors, connections, or family money. You had a teacher's salary, a used car, and one question that quietly changed the direction of your life. The question came from an aging business owner who wanted to retire. He looked at you and asked, "Would you rather spend your life working for businesses or owning them?" You laughed. He didn't. A month later, you bought your very first company. It wasn't famous. It wasn't exciting. But that ordinary little business became the first piece of a quiet empire that almost nobody would ever notice. You were 29 when you bought your first company. It wasn't a startup. It wasn't on the news. It was a small neighborhood printing business whose owner wanted to retire after 34 years. His name was Walter. He didn't need another buyer with big promises. He wanted someone who would take care of the employees he had known for decades. Somehow, he trusted a school teacher. The price wasn't impossible, but it was far more money than you had in your savings account. Every bank said no, until one local banker offered a different solution that changed everything. Instead of borrowing the entire amount, Walter agreed to finance most of the sale himself. The business would slowly pay for its own purchase, 1 month at a time. It was the first time you realized that businesses could buy themselves. For the next 2 years, your mornings belonged to your students. Your evenings belonged to the printing company. While everyone thought you were working overtime as a teacher, you were quietly learning how to become an owner. The printing company never made headlines. It never doubled overnight. But every single month, after paying salaries, rent, and suppliers, there was money left over. That was your first lesson. Most people spend extra income. You gave every extra dollar a new job. It never stayed in your personal account for long. It quietly waited for the next opportunity. 3 years later, another owner was ready to retire. This time, it was a small commercial cleaning company with long-term contracts and reliable customers. While others saw an ordinary business, you saw dependable cash flow. You didn't celebrate buying your second company. You drove home in the same old car. You walked into your classroom the next morning and taught history exactly as you had the day before. By the time your colleagues noticed you never seemed stressed about money, you already owned 3 profitable businesses. The strange part was nobody had the slightest idea how quickly your quiet empire was beginning to grow. Owning 3 companies taught you something business school never could. The real opportunity wasn't building businesses from scratch. It was buying businesses that already had customers, employees, and steady cash flow. A business broker named Michael became the only person who knew what you were looking for. Every few months, he called with the same question. "I've got another owner ready to retire. Are you interested?" You rarely said yes immediately. Sometimes you spent weeks reading financial statements, visiting warehouses, and talking to employees who had no idea you might become their next owner. By 40, you quietly owned 8 companies. A printing shop, a cleaning company, a landscaping business, a small HVAC contractor, and several others that most people would call boring. Your neighbors never saw an empire. They saw the same teacher leaving for school every morning, carrying the same worn leather bag. They had no idea those ordinary mornings were funding an extraordinary future. By then, buying companies had become a system. You weren't chasing exciting ideas anymore. You were looking for owners in their 60s, people with healthy businesses, but no one to take over. Your accountant, Laura, changed one habit that shaped everything. "Never buy the next company in your own name," she said. "Let each business stand on its own." You followed that advice without realizing how valuable it would become. One company quietly funded the next. The landscaping business helped buy a small plumbing company. The plumbing company helped acquire a local packaging supplier. Growth no longer depended on your teacher's salary. Your paycheck from school still paid your groceries, your gas, and your ordinary life. But your businesses were paying for your future. Every year, the gap between those 2 worlds grew wider. Then came a year you'll never forget. In just 11 months, you bought 4 companies. By the time summer ended, you quietly owned 12 businesses, and not a single person at school suspected a thing. 12 companies sounded impossible to other people. To you, they were simply 12 systems managed by capable people. You weren't buying jobs. You were buying teams that already knew how to do their work. Every company had its own manager. Every manager sent one simple report at the end of each month. You spent more time reading those reports on Sunday evenings than running the businesses themselves. The strange part was your students never noticed a difference. Every Monday morning, you still stood in front of the whiteboard, explaining history with the same patience and the same quiet smile. While the world celebrated flashy entrepreneurs on magazine covers, you quietly signed the papers for your 20th company. There were no cameras, no interviews, and no celebration dinner. That afternoon, you returned to school just in time for a parent-teacher conference. The parents thanked you for helping their son improve his grades. They never imagined the teacher sitting across from them had quietly built a business empire. The first person to suspect something wasn't a banker or an investor. It was another teacher. She noticed you never seemed worried about money, even when everyone else complained about rising prices. One afternoon she asked, "How do you stay so calm?" You smiled and said, "I try to make my money work harder than I do." She laughed, thinking it was just another teacher's joke. Truth was much quieter. While you were grading exams on Friday night, your companies were serving customers, signing contracts, and earning income without needing you in the room. Years earlier, you thought success would change your lifestyle. Instead, it changed your choices. You still packed your lunch, drove the same reliable car, and arrived before the first school bell. By the time people finally started asking if you had another source of income, you had already spent years making sure the answer would never be obvious. The real number reached you on an ordinary Tuesday morning. You were sitting alone in your classroom before the students arrived when your accountant emailed your annual financial summary. You opened the report without expecting anything unusual. At the top of the page, one number quietly stood apart from everything else. 20 companies, a net worth of over $40 million. You looked around the empty classroom. The same desks, the same whiteboard, the same lesson plan waiting for first period. Nothing in the room looked different, but everything in your life had changed. When the first students walked through the door, they greeted you exactly as they always had. To them, you weren't a millionaire. You were simply the teacher who remembered every student's name and believed they could do better. That's the strange thing about real wealth. It doesn't always arrive with headlines, luxury cars, or applause. Sometimes, it quietly grows in the background while the world keeps calling you Mr. Thompson, the history teacher.